Welcome to Feminist Founders, a podcast that explores how to create a more equitable world through entrepreneurship with your hosts, Becky Mollenkamp and Faith Clarke. Hello, we're back at it, continuing the series that we've been doing the last couple of weeks around the Feminist Founders framework, vision, leadership, culture, systems. And now we're going to talk about the fifth, which is disruption or conflict change, basically. And this is the one that initially, when we talked about this was my only sort of sticky point where I was like, no, it's just the other four because these things are going to be inside of each of those. And you felt strongly about it being its own thing, which I definitely came around to and fully agree with now. But you want to talk a little bit about why you feel like it needs to be its own element instead of just something that's included inside of the other elements?
Yeah, I think that it's always interesting to me how much our discomfort kind of causes us to not disrupt things, right? And so we're here as feminist founders with a whole different framework about how to do business. And I think we have to come to peace with, yeah, it's going to feel awful in some moments. I'm going to come up against things that feel like almost life and death to me. And when I'm coming up with that internally, how do I navigate that? This feels really important because if I project it onto other people, if I, do the kind of hand it down and everybody, the person at the bottom ends up kicking the cat. Now I have to figure out. Okay, good. If the person at the end ends up kicking the cat, that kind of stream of projection, I have to own that my discomfort and how I handle it affects so many more people than just me. And then externally, like between two people, we just talked about systems. We talked about collaborating and creating systems. And in this collaboration, we're going to have an experience with difference. And if we are not at peace with our own, like what causes discomfort for us, then we'll pull rank. We'll lean into our power identities and kind of double down. And then our methods of navigating conflict through old systems have been do what I say, or I'll acquiesce. And neither of those are co-creating the preferred future. So this whole thing of disruption keeps us where we are and creates things that we don't want. And so we have to just be present with it.
Yeah, and it's just so ever present and so important if you're going to try and change systems, because there's just no way to do it without feeling this, that it did feel important enough that it's like, no, it needs to be its own piece of this framework, that it gets the attention it deserves, because otherwise it feels like you're sort of just kind of, dismissing the importance of it when you're just sort of putting it inside of the others, and it doesn't give it the importance that it needs. So I totally came around and was like, yeah, we need it on as its own thing. So when we talk about disruption and discomfort, there is, like you mentioned, the internal and then kind of the external, right? The internal, as solopreneurs, often we learn that we have to navigate that. Sometimes people talk about mindset and things like that, but it's that internal battle that we often face when we're trying to challenge systems, the things of like imposter syndrome that comes up, or the fear that stops us, the fight, flight, fawn responses, those sorts of things. And then the external, which even if you're a solopreneur, there's the external. It's how you deal with your clients, how you deal with communities outside of you, consultants, anyone, right? Like even if you are a solopreneur, or even if you're the most introverted solopreneur, you are still inside of and in collaboration with and in community with others when you're running a business. There's just no way not to be, or you're not selling anything. So, right. So let's talk about the internal first, just because it seems like, I think in my experience anyway, I have a hard time being in right relation with others if I'm not first in right relation with myself. And so I think often this work is internal and then out, because if we can't be with ourselves and learn how to deal with these issues for ourselves, it's really hard to deal with others. So when you think about dealing with that discomfort that comes up as a solopreneur, for me, one of the first things that I think has been helpful is the piece of self-compassion, of understanding that it's not always like reducing shame. It's not like I am bad. I am doing my best inside of flawed systems. And that will inherently be challenging because the systems are broken. So of course it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. I'm coming up against things that don't feel right because they aren't right. Right. And my reaction to that may be challenging. It may be to feel really uncomfortable. It may be to feel really bad. And that's normal. I think the more I can normalize that it's hard to exist inside of flawed systems and that that's not about me, it's a systems issue, not a me issue, that often starts to help me navigate through some of that discomfort. Like that's been the best starting point for me anyway, because I think too often we respond to discomfort, many of us anyway, start to make it a shameful thing. Like, why can't I figure this out? What's wrong with me? Why am I feeling this way when other people seem to be okay? And I think nothing good comes from that shamey space. So that's one of the places I like to start. For you, when you think about the internal discomfort, what comes up as like the stuff that matters most in shifting how your relationship with discomfort looks?
Yeah, I think I tend to focus on my ability to separate out a series of responses that can feel really fast. You know, a person shows you something and you think, God, I thought this person was competent. And in between the showing me the thing and that response, even the thought response is a series of things. And I try to break that down for myself and slow myself down. So the primary technique there is just to build the pause in, and to build the pause in situations where it doesn't matter, so that I can start to understand. I'm having a ton of background noise. I hope it's not. Anyway, so I try to build the pause in situations where it doesn't matter, so that I can begin to understand me and how I react to things, right? So if I break that down, I saw something, I felt something in my body. Back to our conversation in the previous time about honoring our body. I felt something in my body. What did I feel? Where did I feel it? Did I tighten my jaw? Did I compress my head? What did I do? What was happening? And then what was the thought I had when I felt that feeling? Like, did I interpret that feeling as, was that disappointment? Was that fear? Was that right? Before I even get to this other person and what they handed to me, I need to kind of be up close with what's going on for me. So I was really depending on this image to make me some money because I have the rent I need to pay, or the mortgage, or the kids' tuition. And so now I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'm farther away from this money than I thought I was. And I'm really feeling desperate. That's wisdom there. Okay, good. So I need to do some tending to myself and this desperation, and then I can bracket it. And so practicing this really granular self-knowing, so that I can know when it's money stuff, I tend to get really uptight in my shoulders, and versus when it's stuff to do with my kids, I feel that in my belly. And that's my mama bear kind of getting activated. And it's not this client's fault where they're triggering my mom, and I think, so for me, it's a really granular thing that allows me to know the difference between the story I'm telling and what's actually happening. And in so many situations, I've seen professional, like EDs and managers will say, this person is so unprofessional. And you and I have a whole thing about unprofessional. But when I'm decoding that unprofessional with a person, something happened, they felt uncomfortable, they probably felt challenged, they either felt their knowledge was being challenged, they felt disrespected. There's some series of things happening that resulted in this person is unprofessional. And before they even get to what the person is doing, it's so powerful to know what's going on for you. Oh, you're thinking, I'm 54 and I'm still in this job dealing with these people who don't respect me. Why do you think they don't respect you? Yeah, because my ex-husband didn't respect me. We have so much life that we're living. And I think that intimacy with that is where I tend to start, but on a physiological level, what's going on. We push down, by the way, the body so much that we don't even know we're feeling discomfort. Like, we've gone straight to, no, this is just a clinical analysis. It's clearly incompetent, completely missing that my stomach is churning, my shoulder is tight, and my jaw is clenched.
Well, you mentioned the word story in there, and I think so often without that pause, without the self-awareness, we just go to this automatic, my story is facts. This is truth. Right. And it may be truth in that it's the truth of what I'm experiencing, but it doesn't make it facts of this is an undeniable fact of what is real. Right. Because the person on the other side of that story has their own experience of the story. And even when it's a story that doesn't have two people, it's just me and my experience of the world. we start to believe our stories are facts. And so that person was rude to me, or, I'm going to not be able to feed my kids this month because I didn't make enough money and now I'm in panic mode. And we believe that story is true before we actually examine, is that truth? Will you not be able to feed your kids? Are there not other options? Is there not, is there not enough food to make it through the month? Is there not resources out there you might be able to access? Do you not have a community that could care for you? Whatever. We just immediately believe whatever story our brain tells us. Going back to the amygdala that you mentioned in the last episode, it's like this fear response that's there to protect us, right? Like, it's always there for a reason, trying to protect us. But unfortunately, sometimes the ways the brain tries to protect us are actually not very helpful. And so I love the idea of the pause. I've always talked to clients about practicing the pause for that same reason, that we need to pause, breathe, take a moment to do the work of, what is the story my brain's telling me here? What evidence do I have that supports that? And what evidence may contradict that? And sometimes that can be challenging to do alone because we are so caught up in the story, and we often are just fighting to keep that story to be truth. We want it to be true so badly, and we need others to help us maybe do a little of that unpacking. But doing it internally for yourself, learning those skill sets, like you said, learning to practice the pause when you don't even need it, so that when you do, you can grab for it and actually use it. Because if we don't have that skill set developed in the easiest of times, there's no way we'll pull for it in the hardest of times. And the hardest of times, we're going to revert to what comes easy. And so
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
that's important.
there's something about the activation when something is going on that reduces our access to the mind and the body that makes the best decisions in that moment. And so I mean, I'm really good at now separating from myself and the story I'm making. What I'm working on now is, even, does the story even matter? Because if I can become aware in the moment when I start to be activated and regulate myself, I have access to the mind that will be clearer and tell a different or better story than the mind that is dysregulated, fearful, and therefore telling the familiar story, the one from when I was 6 that I have kept holding that thread of, right? And so I'm good at knowing what the story is. I can quickly, that's my abandonment stuff. Yeah, that's my invisibility stuff. But it doesn't really matter. What matters is, I'm tightening up my shoulder, and I know how to untighten this shoulder. I actually know how to regulate my body while I'm in conversation with people. And if I don't, I should learn that. How do I access? A friend of mine, a colleague, said that you have access to different memories in different brain states. So if your brain is in a beta state, you have different memories than if you are in a theta state, or if you're in a delta state. That's why you lose memory of your dreams. It was a fun conversation. And so, what's the brain state that helps me be able to navigate what's actually happening here? I need to know myself enough to know how to get back there. And so a colleague of mine just says, we're constantly in the business of changing our bodies to fit what we need. So if you can be intentional about knowing how your body is changing, oh, it's going into fight flight, how do I regulate it? Bring it back to what's needed. And that's our leadership responsibility, to show up with the body that is best able to move our desire for equity and justice forward.
And, I think everyone probably has different relationships with what works for them or doesn't, and that can evolve over time. I know for me, like, whereas you feel like, it doesn't matter to me so much whether this is about that abandonment issue or whatever else. I just need to know, like, can I relax my shoulders in this moment? I am the kind of person who, it helps me to get in touch with what is the story here. And because it helps me then to be able to say, this isn't that. I'm safe here, right? This isn't about that abandonment. This is not happening when I was 6. This is happening now. I'm safe here. And only once I can get to that place can I then access the ability to be able to say, okay, relax your shoulders, relax your jaw, right? Because otherwise I am still very wound up in the believing the story of, nope, they're going to leave me. They're going to hurt me, whatever. I have to be able to, like, acknowledge that this is about that trauma and that this moment of what's happening isn't that, before I'm able to access what I need to be able to release my jaw, to relax my shoulders, to be present, and to let that piece go. So I think you have to figure out what works for you, but understanding that very often our immediate response is not at all about what's going on in this moment. It is about stuff that happened long ago. And now our job, like you said, as leaders, but also just as like good humans who want to be in right relationship with others, is to be able to be present minded and to be able to be with this situation and allow for that discomfort to be happening, because also that discomfort can be happening while I still have to be engaging with someone else. And I have to be able to be in that discomfort and continue to show up. And so what does that look like? And I think, and this has always been interesting to me too, I have found that when I am in spaces primarily with white women, there is a general consensus often that there is discomfort with discomfort. White women often don't like conflict, right? We have been conditioned to be afraid of conflict, to avoid conflict. And I used to long ago believe that was more of a universal woman experience. And what I have learned over time from being in rooms with women who are not white women, who are Black women, brown women, who have told me more often than not, I don't share that discomfort with conflict. That is not an experience that I understand. So don't say that is women are uncomfortable with conflict, because that's more of a white women experience. And so that has been interesting for me to learn too, because I used to sort of feel like that was a universal woman experience, and it's not necessarily. But for those of us who are, part of our role in leadership is to learn to get comfortable with conflict. Because too often what people will say as a sign of a good culture is that there's no conflict. No one's fighting. And that's actually not a sign of a good culture, right? Because that means people are afraid. They don't feel safe to be able to show their discomfort, to have conflict. And so conflict is an important part of culture. So if you're someone like me who is afraid of conflict, we have to learn how to be with conflict in order to create an actual healthy culture. And that may not, there may be other people for whom being in conflict is not as scary. And so that piece isn't something they have to navigate as much. But certainly if your experience is more like mine, then you have to learn how to be with discomfort. And that starts with being your own discomfort, learning how to be with your own discomfort, and just like be compassionate to yourself to say, I feel uncomfortable right now, but I don't have to run from that. I can be with it and I can function with it. And that can be really challenging for a lot of people. So I just want to speak to that piece, I think comes first for a lot of us who don't even have that skill yet, before we can learn how to be in conflict with others.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody who feels good when there is conflict. But the privilege of being able to avoid it's a privilege, right? Because the conflict, for many people with multiple marginalized identities, the conflict comes to you. You cannot avoid it, and a certain amount of acquiescing has led to further harm. And so there is the, skill of standing up for yourself and whatever. But I don't think there's anybody who will feel good with conflict. I do think that depending on what's happened in our lives and in ancestrally, we have ancestral stories that show up. And so part of my own work right now, some of the stories have a long tail and require lots of processing. And like you said, in the meantime, I'm in this present moment with you right now. And I don't have the time to go and dialogue with 6-year-old Faith. Yeah, later. Right now, I do need to release my shoulder and I do need to show up and be present in this moment, because the stories do have a long tail and are they're kind of self-sustaining because we're in the environment that reinforces the stories. So I have been in conflict navigation situations, supporting healthier conflict navigation, where a white person and a Black person are in conflict. And the story is being maintained just by the very presence of their bodies. And the ability to kind of know what's true for you, even in the face of what's contextually true. And kind of tend to that and then be present is just essential in this time where we are reaping the harm of multiple generations of bad things, And so I do kind of lean into the given all of that, my stories, my past ancestral stuff. How do I kind of learn to give myself some space and then navigate this present moment as a fully regulated individual, and then go break furniture if that's what's needed, or cry, or talk the story through, or whatever.
Yeah, it's so funny how so many things about business, and maybe it's just where I'm at in my parenting journey, but how many times when we talk about business, makes me think about parenting as well. And not in a way that I'm trying to infantilize like people that we're in relationship with, but that, as a parent, there is a role that you have with the relationship with your child that looks different than the relationship you would have with your best friend or your partner or, many other people. And I think often that is what it looks like to be a leader inside of a business. It's not about, because I think too often in parenting, we also think of it as hierarchical, and that is not always healthy for in any relationship, including parenting. So it's not that I am above these other people, but my role is different than their role inside of this relationship. And so my role as a parent with my child is different than their role with me. And there is an obligation to shield them from certain things. I don't need my child to take on the weight of my discomfort, right? I need to help them manage their discomfort. And then I need another space, perhaps with my partner, where I go and manage my discomfort. And I feel similar in that relationship with an employee or a client. It is not the client's responsibility to manage my discomfort. It is not my employee's responsibility to manage my discomfort. I can have other spaces where I take that to do that. Inside of this relationship where I am trying to help set the culture, I need to show up a certain way. I think sometimes when we think about decolonizing some of these issues around conflict navigation and leadership, we sometimes start to think, well, then I've seen it happen where it's like, well, we're all the same here then, right? So if we're getting rid of the hierarchical structures, then does that mean I show up and I cry in front of my employees and I let them take care of me and all of that? And that can sometimes become a challenge for people as well, is understanding like if we're removing some of that hierarchy that we're used to with roles, and it's like I'm up here, they're down here. I'm starting to say no, we're all in this more circular relationship. When you think about discomfort and navigating that sort of thing, what do you see as the leadership role inside of that? Like, because you mentioned maybe I take that elsewhere. Is that in a way in reinforcing hierarchy, or is it just saying, there are responsibilities that we each have and they look different inside of this relationship?
I'm notorious for building high vulnerability spaces and high disclosure spaces. I don't think I need to process my stuff within a corporate place or whatever, but I feel really free to express it, because I think that part of what we are not doing, and we use that as the leadership, it becomes a leadership burden, is that no, I am responsible for holding the space and making it safe for you all. And that's in no way reciprocal. And I'm like, no, actually, we're all humans having a human experience, and we all need to feel the ease of saying, hey, this is a human experience I'm having right now, and knowing that that won't be judged, including me. I'm human as the leader. And then also, we're all responsible for our own regulation. And then communally, we're responsible for co-regulation and communal understanding and repair. So it's like we're all kind of holding these multiple pieces. And I think the leadership role is to monitor for when that's going awry. So it's like, are we in more disclosure than we need given the time and the goal for this time? Are we not having enough disclosure? And maybe I need to pause the meeting and say, hey, let's talk about this thing. So that's my leadership role. But while with children, I do feel the responsibility to shield. I think that our desire to shield our employees is hierarchical and supremacist. So I can be having a human experience. It's like I am the same way I can say I'm a visual person. I need pictures and I need it to be modeled. Don't just tell me the instructions because I'm going to lose the pattern. You have to, if I can say that, then why can't I say I'm PMSing, right? But so it's like allowing ourselves to have a full human experience with each other and to be held, I think, is part of too much conflict shows up because we're hiding all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have no capacity. My son's been up until, 4 a.m. I've slept for 2 hours. I'm now snapping at you instead of asking for grace. Like I'm on 2 hours sleep. So I don't think I can be fully present in this conversation because my nerves are just twitchy. I try to hide that. I take my twitchy nerves into the conversation with you and then I, harm you and myself,
Yeah.
and
Well,
so.
and I think in any relationship, in any space, it's also important to, and these are things that can be messy and sometimes we get it wrong, but it's important to know, is this the right place for this? And it's not because of my leadership role or hierarchical stuff, but because this is trauma stuff I should be doing with a therapist, right? So like, it's just noted, starting to learn what is appropriate in this type of relationship. It's less because I'm your boss and you're my employee, but because I don't need to dump this kind of stuff onto anyone who's not my therapist or maybe my closest partner or something, right? But when you get,
Oh, right?
what's that?
To the culture. Like, what kind of culture are we creating here? And in one place, you might be creating a culture where you are processing trauma stuff with each other for the first half an hour of the group meeting. I had a client who all of them were social workers and therapists, and they never supported each other with the very skills that they support the clients with. And I'm like, why not? So I think once we've decided, and I think this is the power of what we're saying, instead of all systems deciding for us, we can decide what kind of work community we're creating and what happens in this space and what's normal in this space. And then we can put the processes in place to just kind of normalize that and make that
Yeah.
okay.
Well, and that's where those processes and systems are important. And the last piece I wanted to touch on, because you just mentioned it too, is like sometimes we'll get it wrong. And that can be where conflict comes up as well. Like I've messed up. Now what? And learning how to navigate harm repair and restorative harm repair when, especially as a leader, when you've messed up is so, so, so critical, because if it's not modeled by you, then that it becomes a very big part of the culture. If it is modeled by you, then that can become part of the culture. And learning how to, as a leader, not just say, well, this is the way it is because it is, or not being able to ever admit that you were wrong out of fear of being respected less or believed less or whatever it is. We have to learn what it looks like to model that kind of behavior where you show up and say, I got this wrong. I am sorry. Here's what I'm going to do so that this doesn't happen again, or that hopefully it won't happen again. Or if it does happen again, here's what, but being able to show up in that way. And this, I think, of all the things we've talked about, is the piece, and maybe it's because it's the last piece here, it's the most, perhaps the most mature part of this experience, is the piece that I see people still again and again getting wrong, where they cannot bring themselves to admit they've made a mistake. And even if they do, they don't do a good job of it, right? They show up and say like, I messed up, but you did this and you did that. And this is why, and this happened, not learning how to just say, I made a mistake. I am sorry. This is what I'm going to do.
I think this is one of those conflict navigation is one of those things that we should put in vision and write it out. Like when stuff happens, because I don't even know, you can have conflict with people, nobody making a mistake, because people are different. People are just different. And I heard a story about a therapist who had a client was triggered and didn't know what the trigger was. It took them multiple sessions to figure out that the doorknob on her office was the same doorknob as was in the house that this person had as a child where they were abused. And we will have conflict because we are different and we have such differing stories. And so expecting it as norm of human life together, it's the how do I be with difference? And it's the old systems that have taught us that difference is threatening. I was reading recently about the Vulcan Star Trek, first generation Star Trek, the Vulcan like theory or ideology, infinite differences in infinite combinations. Like if we can actually be at peace, like this is how we are navigating the world. We're infinitely different and we're going to put that together in infinite ways. So there is no way to have rules with it. And we're going to kind of, because we can't know infinite differences, we just can't know. We will hit upon somebody's stuff. So then how do I imagine that happening and really vision that out and really write that out? And some of the work I've done with organizations is just to write out a skeletal conflict navigation pathway. And that means if other people feel some kind of way, like not even done anything wrong, but somebody feels some kind of way because of something I did, what's the process? Like, what do you say? Like we were even in a group where somebody says, why don't we use oops, ouch? Like somebody said, somebody says something and somebody else says, ouch. And then I know I said something and you say, oops, do you want us to talk about that? So building in back to the processes, ways of normalizing the presence of difference and how we each respond to it, and then giving ourselves the space, either now or later, to dialogue on it and come up with agreements, collective agreements on, oh, in this case, oh, okay, I am so sorry. And, and just making that be a normal path. So that this person who found out that they screwed up, whatever way that happened, isn't trying to come up with a way. Like,
Right.
we have as a community multiple ways that we engage with difference, and it's just normal. Nobody needs to feel judged or shamed because we're infinitely different, and there are infinite combinations of that different.
I mean, I learn from my kid and his experience of the world all the time, just because it's so much more pure, and not yet, he's young enough still that it's not deeply tarnished by all of these systems. And just even in like his first grade classroom, they had a system in their classroom for conflict navigation. They learned what they called, kind of like your oops ouch, it was a bug and a wish. It bugs me when I wish we'd, right? So like, it bugs me when you make that noise. I wish you would be quieter while I'm reading, whatever. Right now, that wouldn't be necessarily the way I would approach it, because I prefer I language a bit more than that. But still, they had a system that all 20 something of them in the classroom knew. They learned it early. It was repeated often. It was displayed. They understood the process, and they learned the language. And I saw my child use the language because he learned it and he knew it, and they all did it. And there was this like understanding with each other that then when someone said a bug and a wish, it wasn't a, how dare you do that? It was a like, oh, okay, that's what we've decided here. So now I know, and I get to make a choice of how I deal with what you've now shared with me. And it's so simple. And yet we don't see it replicated as we get older, right? We lose those skills that I see happening all the time with younger kids. And I don't know that I think we have evolved beyond what we need at 8 years old or 6 years old. But the truth is we haven't, and we don't. And we still need, people thrive on structure. They need structure. They need systems so they understand how to show up. As I heard Brene Brown say, I don't know if she was the first to say it, but clarity is kindness. Being unclear is unkind. We need that clarity. Just tell me how you want me to show up, and then I know what to do. But when there is nothing that tells me what's expected, if I were to show up inside of a meeting with a bug and a wish and you didn't know it, you'd be like, it might rub you the wrong way. You'd be like, I don't care what bugs you and how dare you, and like, that's me or whatever. But if we had all agreed this is the language we'll use, it removes all of that. It's no longer like, it doesn't feel like this personal attack or something. It just feels like, oh, you're using the system we've agreed to, and now I know how to behave, and thank you. Right? We become appreciative of that. So anyway, I love that. And I just think it's so important, and we don't do enough of it.
And culture, one element of culture is meaning making, right? Something that you do in one culture is interpreted in one way because that's how it is in that culture. And so when we're designing cultures within our organizations, we are designing the meaning making. So we're saying, hey, all together, when stuff happens and we feel some kind of way, how do we want to do it? And we're designing something that is going to be adaptable to the actual we, right? Because when Becky leaves and then Faith joins, there is what is this way and what would work now with Faith on the team. It worked with Becky, but does it still work with Faith? And how do we co-create what will work? And if we continue to trust in our ability to create what we all need together, then we'll just keep shifting it and evolving it and morphing it and adapting it, in restorative ways versus, top down or kind of put on or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, we are going to be back next week to talk a little bit about what this looks like in practice, like taking all of what we've discussed and talking about in practice. And I think one of the things we should talk about is that, because I don't know if we discussed it enough in these conversations, is like, when you decide you want to implement all this, what does it look like when you bring the collective together from the beginning, from vision through all of this? What does that look like? So we'll come back next week and we'll talk more about what this looks like in practice, and also tell you about something we've been cooking up for people who want to really dig deep into these things. So we'll be back next week to share more. And until then, have a wonderful day and learn to practice the pause, be with your own discomfort.
Absolutely. It's the biggest gift you can give yourself.
Great. Thanks for listening to Feminist Founders Podcast. If you'd like to learn more or support our work, please visit feministfounders.co. The link is in the show notes. There you can become a paid supporter for as little as the price of a cup of coffee. Thanks again, and we can't wait to welcome you back for our next episode.